Hello, this is Al Judge. Welcome to another lesson from my book, From Photos to Art with Photoshop. In this introduction to layers, we're going to cover a variety of topics that will help prepare us for discussion of layers, selections, and layer masks. These three topics are so interrelated it is difficult to discuss one without getting involved in the others. If you understand one, it makes it a lot easier to understand another. The common thread among these three things is each one limits portions of the image so that you can get very specific in how you manipulate the image. So I'm just going to start off here with the basic concept of layers. When you open an image file like this, Photoshop automatically creates a background layer. This is the layers panel over here. We'll see all our layers in this area. So the very first layer Photoshop creates, it calls background layer, and it italicizes the word background. This is the only time you ever see that word italicized in a stack of layers. Also note that it has a lock icon telling you that the layer is locked. Now we'll talk in a second about what that means. Over here we have visibility that we can toggle on and off. Now when you just have a background layer, it doesn't work. You have to have other layers in order to be able to toggle that on and off, because there's nothing there if I toggle that off. So to come back and talk about a background layer, the main intention of a background layer is to be the foundation for all the other layers that are on top of it. So this is very useful when you're simply editing, modifying it, or modifying an image, improving the image quality. What some people will do is they will create a background copy immediately. And one way to do that is to simply drag this. I'm going to show you where I'm going to drag it before I do it. There's an icon down here that is create a new layer. I'm going to drag that layer to that icon. When I release it, I get a background copy. And as you can see, that is not italicized. This is a normal layer. We can do anything with this layer that we would with any other layer. On the other hand, the background layer has certain characteristics that are locked in. For example, you can't move it in the stack of layers. It is the bottom layer, and that's all there is to it. On a normal layer, I'm going to turn this off now. I can turn the background off, the visibility off now, because I have a copy that I'm working with. Just to show you one of the other things on layers, this is a normal layer. This background copy is a normal layer, and if I choose my eraser tool and I start erasing, you'll see that that area that I erased becomes transparent. I'm going to step backward and get rid of that. Now on the other hand, if I'm working on a background layer and I do the same thing, it fills in with the background color. And this is because a background layer can never have transparency. It's intended to be the bottom layer so there's nothing underneath to see if you erase something. So it just fills in with the background color. Again, I'm going to step backward again, get rid of that. Now what a lot of people will do is they will immediately create a background copy and turn off the background layer and do all the work based on this copy, make all the modifications, changes, whatever. And the advantage to this is you always have the original image in your background, and you can turn it on and off whenever you want for reference, for comparison, for whatever reason, but it's always there. Now, let's talk about just creating a new layer, and we can do that with this icon I talked about. We can just click on that and it will create a new layer, and when it does, it numbers it layer 1, and we can change that. We can change the name of that layer, and I'm going to call this just transparent layer. I'm going to use it to just demonstrate something here. All layers are like transparencies stacked on top of each other with a light source underneath, and as the light comes up through the stack of transparencies, what you see is based on the combination of what's on each of the layers. They all have some characteristics of transparencies, but this particular layer is nothing but transparent. There's nothing on it right now. Okay, so here's my original image, and I've placed a piece of transparent paper on top of it. And now I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to paint over this image. Now in this case, because my background copy is the active layer, and that's indicated by the highlighting here, the blue highlighting tells me that that's the active layer. What I just painted here is on the image itself. And the only way I can get rid of that is to step backward. If I try to erase it, I'm just going to create transparency. I can't erase it. I have to step back, and I have to step back again, and one final time here. No, actually I painted a little more than I remembered. Okay, now I've gotten rid of all the paint. Now on the other hand, if I had had the transparent layer as my active layer and do exactly the same thing, grab a paintbrush and start painting, change the color, do a little other painting, whatever I want to do. Now, in order to get rid of that, all I have to do is change the visibility of that layer. And again, I'm going to turn that layer on. I'm going to turn the background copy off, and you can see that this transparent layer now is transparent except for where I painted. Okay, so I can turn that off. I can also delete this layer because I'm done with it. I'll come up here to delete. I could also do this by just highlighting this and hitting the delete key on my keyboard. But I'm going to right click on that layer and say delete layer. And it'll ask me if I really want to delete the transparent layer, and I'm going to say yes. Okay, now we're going to switch to another image that has a number of layers in them. These layers are adjustment layers, and we're going to talk about them very soon. But for right now, we have a background layer, we have a layer that's been sharpened, and I can turn this background layer off without seeing any effect because the majority of the image is on this sharpened layer. Now I also have an image here that contains only a detail. I'm going to turn that background back on, and I'm going to toggle this layer on and off so you can see exactly what it does. It's in this area. You can see it just brightens up the detail in this area. This is just an example of how specific you can get in controlling your image with layers. As you build different details on layers, you can easily turn those details on and off anytime you like. Now, as I mentioned before, we have a stack of layers over here. And another thing you can do with layers is you can change the order of those layers. Now, I could move this layer above the layer 1 that has that small detail over here, but when I do, if I click on and off the visibility here, you'll see nothing happen. It's because this layer now is above it and totally covering it up. So the order of your layers is just as important as what's on each layer. Another thing in this example is all these layers are adjustment layers. Adjustment layers will affect what's below them. If I were to move one of these layers, like this one for example, to the top of the pile, none of those adjustments will affect it anymore. Okay, so I'm going to move it back down. So the order of your layers will make a difference in what you see. And I'm going to change the visibility of each one of these layers one at a time so you can see its effect on this overall image. Okay, this one's Vibrance, which basically makes colors more vibrant. It takes undersaturated colors and makes them more saturated, takes oversaturated colors and makes them less saturated, and basically balances the saturation of the colors to make the overall image more vibrant. So I'm going to turn that off, and as it turns out in this particular image, we're seeing an effect on the sky, but minor effects down here. There is some if you really study it, but it's not dramatic. Exposure. Now, it has a big effect on this image. Brightness and contrast. Similar to exposure, but brightness is more like an internal light, whereas exposure affects the entire image. Brightness will just brighten up certain areas and make the image brighter overall. Levels is another way to add contrast, and I'm going to turn that off. You can see there is some effect. And curves is another way to add contrast and definition. So I'm turning that on and off. Some people might like the look when the curves layer is turned off. Personally, I like it better with the curves layer on. But the other thing, let's say this is a layer you're not quite sure about, you can come up here and change the opacity, so it doesn't have as dramatic an effect. So you can see as I did that, the difference between visibility and non-visibility for that layer is not as dramatic. I'm going to go back to 100%. And now there's another thing we can do here. Right now, these are called layer masks, and we're going to have a whole chapter and another video on layer masks. But sort of to give a preview, we can use the layer mask to limit what this affects. So when the layer mask is white like this, everything in the image is as if there were no layer mask. Everything is visible. If this is black, everything is invisible. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to double click on that and I'm going to invert it. So now it becomes black. And it has the same effect as if I had just turned off the visibility. You'll see there's no difference now when I turn on the visibility. But what I can do now is I can paint on that with white. Okay. White is my foreground color, so if I grab a paintbrush, it's going to be white. And I can just come in here. Again, this was a curves adjustment. But I can come in here and paint over this car detail and see how that affects it. And maybe I want to do this door. So now when I toggle on and off, you'll see a change in those two areas. And the areas that are affected will be indicated by white areas on this black background. So again, white is visible, black is concealed. Here's another area I might want to paint. Or here, turn that down a bit. As I do each of these things, you can see little white areas appear in the layer mask. When we're talking about layers, we have 5 distinct types of layers that we can be using here in our stack. The first one is image layers, and that's like this image here, the basic image, that's an image layer. Also, this next one, layer 1, is an image layer. It's a very small detail, but it's still an image layer. As I mentioned before, these 5 are adjustment layers, and they adjust the histogram for the image to produce a particular effect. We'll be talking a lot more about histograms and adjustment layers later in the book and in other videos. We also have type layers, and that is text. We'll get back to this in a minute, but we can create horizontal and vertical type. And they're the only 2 we're going to talk about in these lessons in this book. We can basically type in anything we want anywhere on the top of the image. And when we create that box for type, you'll see that Photoshop automatically creates a new layer. It has T for a type layer, and it gives it a name to start with. And right now it just says layer 2. So I'm just going to type in text. Another thing, it still says layer 2 here. When I finalize that text layer by clicking over here to commit to that text, you'll see that the name of the layer changes, and it will tell you exactly the text that's on that layer. Now, with the Move tool activated, I can move that text wherever I want. So I could add some detail in here if I want to make it look like it was part of the building that has some text. I can do a lot of things with text. We talked about some of it when we covered the toolbar in an earlier lesson. And as we go through examples, we will be working with text, and you'll get to learn some more about what you can do with text. But I just wanted to identify the different types of layers. Another layer that we can have is a shape layer. This time I'm just going to use an arrow. And I can transform that, edit, free transform. When I do, I can now use that arrow to point to anything I want within the image. So that's a shape layer. It can be things like the arrow, it can be a rectangle, it can be a circle, it can be a line. And then the final one that I want to talk about is called a fill layer. A fill will either fill the entire canvas size, or it can fill just a portion of the canvas. So I'm going to come over here with the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm just going to select that door, and I'm going to modify that selection slightly with the quick select tool. I have it set on subtract from selection, And I'm just going to come down here. So now that door is selected. It's not a perfect selection, but it's an approximation. I can fill that any way I want. I can fill it with a solid color. I'm going to change that foreground color to gray. The paint bucket will paint over a specific color with the foreground color. So I'm going to come in here. Now I'm on this layer, the main image layer, and I'm going to click on this white. And because I have a very wide tolerance, it got most of the door here. I'm going to go back, step back once, and we have the door, and we can see the rough paint where the edges are no longer clean. Some of the paint is chipped off. I'm going to make this a tighter tolerance. I'm going to make it 15. And now, let me try this again. Okay, the other thing I want to do is I want to uncheck contiguous so it can go anywhere within this box. And you can see I changed that white paint to a gray. I could change it to blue if I wanted to. Okay, so I can have a lot of effect here. And how much of the area is covered by that paint depends on this tolerance. So I'm going to back up here a little and lower that tolerance down to 8%. And now when I click, it's not quite as much effect. So I have filled an area, and I've limited that fill to this rectangular marquee. I'm going to deselect that marquee, and I'm going to click on the same area again so you can see what would happen if I didn't have it there. You can see it's placed that blue throughout the image wherever that same shade existed. And if I come up here and I raise that tolerance up to 50 again, and I click here, and now I click on a different color in the image. Let's say some of this background board. You'll see the majority of the image turns blue. Notice that nothing happened here because this is a different layer. This particular detail is on a totally different layer. Now if I turn it off, you can see what would have happened if it had been on the same layer. Okay, now in addition to this layer as I've shown it, we could have a new file. I'm going to open up a new file, and I'm going to just use a book cover file. If I were to click in here, the entire thing will turn blue because it was all one color. It was white and now it's blue. It will go to the edges of this file. Again, I'm going to back up. I'm going to use elliptical marquee tool this time. If I do the same thing with the paint bucket and the blue color, now it only fills the inside of that ellipse. Back up one more time, and I can come in here and select inverse. So what my selection now is everything from the edge to the ellipse. So now even if I place my cursor inside the ellipse and click, it's outside the ellipse that it will choose and fill. There's another type of fill layer that we need to talk about. I'm going to do this again, but I'm going to choose a different type of fill layer. I'm going to go to this icon at the bottom of the layers panel, come up to gradient. And when I click here, you can see all these swatches show me standard gradient patterns, and I'm going to choose this one. I can also adjust this. You can see where each of the colors, it's a blue, yellow, blue gradient, and you can see how far each one goes. If I move, let's say the yellow, you'll see that shift. Okay, I'm going to just say okay for that and cancel, or okay again. This gradient will fill whatever area is selected. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to invert the selection again so that it's just what's inside here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick a gradient. I'm going to pick the same one, and you can see the result. We're going to do another lesson on gradients, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but the main thing to know with gradients is it will fill the entire canvas or a portion of the canvas if you've made a selection. Going through these examples, you've seen me go up here many times to the Edit menu and step backward. You also notice here that I could just undo the new gradient fill layer. If I come back and I go here again, it will just redo that. So on the Edit menu, the undo will just toggle back and forth between undo and redo. If you want to go back, you really need to use step backward. I can go back as many steps as I want. And once I've gone backward, I can also go forward. So I can step forward. Now I have that gradient showing again. Another way to do the same thing is to come up here. I have the history panel available. It's been attached alongside the panels area here. And I can go back up there and I can pick up at any level I want. I can just go back to where I first created the elliptical marquee. I can go back to the original file. I can go back to this gradient level. I can pick any one of these layers to go back to and start over. Now I'm going to store that back here again. I like to keep that available because it's a handy thing to be able to go back in time. There are many ways to create layers in Photoshop. One of them that I use frequently is Layer, New, Layer via Copy. And I want to talk about this just because it's a little different than some other methods and you have to think about it before you use it. So let's talk about that. If I decide that I want to just copy a portion of this panoramic image, I could crop it down to make a smaller picture, or I could just use the marquee tool, rectangular marquee tool, to copy just a portion of it. And that's what I'm going to do in this example. However, what's important to know is that when you use this tool, it's very important which layer is active at the time. So right now, if we look over here, we'll see the levels layer is the active one. And if I click Layer via Copy, it's just going to copy the entire levels adjustment layer. That's not what we want. I'm going to drag that down to the trash can. Likewise, if we had this background copy layer, which is a filter layer with overlay blend mode, which is intended to sharpen the image, but it just looks gray when you look at the layer itself. So if that was highlighted and we did layer, new, layer via copy, we would get a partial gray image. Just gray in that area that we had the marquee box. I'm going to turn these back on. We'll get rid of that one also. Take it to the trash can. So now the obvious place would be if the background layer. That's where the actual image is here. If we do the same thing, we draw our marquee tool. We use layer, new, layer via copy. We get just that portion that we wanted. And you can see that that's all we get on that layer. And so I'm going to turn these back on. We could drag this any way we want, or we could just move it to a new file and make it a whole new picture. There's lots of things we can do with that once we've selected it and separated it from the main image. When you have an image like this with multiple layers, it's very important to make sure that when you use a selection tool to grab part of the image, that you have the correct layer active so that it copies exactly what you want. Okay, let's move on to a different topic. Another short topic I want to cover here quickly while we have this image open is just duplicating layers. There's several ways we can do it, but I'm just going to show you using the background layer here. I'm going to duplicate it several different ways. And the first one is to bring it down to this icon here at the bottom of the layers area, which is just to create a new layer. So if we just drag it to that icon, when we release, you'll see background copy. I'm going to drag that to the trash can, and we'll duplicate that background layer a different way. We can, if the background layer is highlighted, and this can be any layer, it doesn't have to be the background layer. I'm just using the background layer as an example. So if we have the background layer here highlighted, and I right click with my mouse, I can go to duplicate layer, and I can name it whatever I want, and it'll add that new layer to the image. Okay, this time I'm going to duplicate the duplicate. So if this is highlighted, that's the active layer, it's the background copy too. I can come up to layer, duplicate layer, and again give it any name I want and say OK. So there I have another way to create a duplicate layer. So I just wanted to go over those 3 techniques to create a duplicate layer because it's something you'll do very frequently. Alright, let's move on to another topic. An easy way to create a border around an image is to use image canvas size. In this case, we're going to make it relative to the image so we don't have to worry about what the actual dimensions of the image are. We're going to add 2 inches to the width and 2 inches to the height. And we're going to distribute it evenly around the image, and we're going to make it gray. Now in this array that you're looking at here, this anchor grid, the image is represented by the dot in the middle, and the arrows are telling us that it's going to add canvas in all directions. So we'll just click on that. Okay, and you can see we have a gray border around this image now. It is 1 inch wide all the way around. We added 2 inches to the width. So we put 1 inch on the left and 1 inch on the right. And the same with the top and bottom. We added 1 inch to the top, inch to the bottom. So we're going to go and do this again. We're going to do canvas size, leave it relative, add 2 inches to the width, 2 inches to the height, and this time I'm going to tell it, I'm going to go back a minute just to be clear. In this array, you click on the direction you don't want to go. So I'm going to click on this arrow, and when I do, it's going to show me that the canvas is going to be added to the right and to the bottom. And this time I'm going to make the color white, and I'm going to click OK. And now we have a white border just on the right and the bottom. Now let's do it one more time. Canvas size, 2 inches width, 2 inches to the height, and we're going to go just the opposite. We're going to add it to the top and to the left, and we're going to make it black. Okay, there we have another border, and in these last two, the width of the border is 2 inches because we only put it on one side. So anyway, not that you would make a border like this, but it's just a demonstration of how it's done and how you select where you want to add the material. So I hope this has been helpful. We'll move on to another topic. In this example, we'll be creating a collage, starting with a single image and using canvas size to make a large enough canvas to add all the images. And then we'll crop it down to the collage we want. So I'm going to start off by just opening a number of files in Bridge. I just double click on any one of them and they'll all open up. And you can see we have 9 images total down the side here. And I'm going to start with this one. What I'm going to do is go to Image, the canvas size. We're not on relative. I'm not going to use relative this time. I'm going to use absolute. So I'm going to increase the width to 50 and the height to 40. And this is just a rough guess of what space I think I'll need to do my collage. And I want to add all the space on the right and on the bottom. And I want to make it a white background. So now I have to resize to be able to even see my image, fit screen. So here we are, that's the first image all the way up here in the left-hand corner. I'm going to go to the next image and just drag it up to that first image. Drop it in. We have a color conflict, but I'm not worried about that. Okay, I'm going to position it roughly. I'm going to go to the next image, do the same thing. Again, we'll position it roughly. Next image. Now we've got to the point where we can't, well, we can probably get the one last one in. We're going to drag this up to that first image. And we're going to put that there. Now the next image I want to grab. The composite image is no longer visible. We have a couple choices. what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this original image, and I'm going to drag this to the right, and as you see, the other images are going to shift around it. And it should put us in a place where we can reach it for more images. So we've gotten 5 images. I'm going to go to image number 6 and drag that up, place it there. Image number 7, drag it up. Okay. Image number 8. And image number 9. And now we can't see the image we want up here. We could move it again like we did before, or another way to do it is we can just do a duplicate layer. So I'm going to do a duplicate layer this time, and I'm going to place it in the first image that we had. So now if I go to that image, we'll see that it's the last one. And you can see these are all different sizes. So we have a fairly big canvas here, so we can play around with this some. Now the one thing is I cannot change this first image in size because it's on the background layer. It's part of the background layer. I could make a copy of it and place it over top, but I'm going to say that that establishes our basic size. So I want to bring these 2 images down to where they have the same height as this one. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to here, View, and I'm going to put my rulers in place. I'm going to size this again, fit it. And I'm going to bring a ruler down to be right at the bottom of that image. That looks pretty good. So now I'm going to go to my next image, Edit, Free Transform. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and I'm just going to move up to that line. And I'll go to my next, I have to lock that in. Go to my next image, Edit, Free Transform, hold down the Shift key, and resize that. Actually, that was a little overdone. There we go. Okay. Now we can do whatever we want with this one, and let's make the frog approximately the same width as the first image. So we're going to bring a guideline over here. We're going to go to our next layer. Edit, Free Transform. Hold down the Shift key, and we'll bring it up to that size. And now I'm going to bring down our guideline here. Go to our next image. Edit, Free Transform. Hold down the Shift key. Size it up a bit. I'll apply that, but I want to bring down another line to make sure we have same height, which we do. And then that leaves me with this last image in the line. I'm going to move that up, edit, free transform, hold down the shift key, bring it right up to that line. We'll lock that one in. Okay, I'd like to make this image the same width as the first two rows. I'm going to grab this and move it up just a bit. File, edit free transform, shift, and take it right to that line. Lock that in. Bring the next image up here. Just place that there temporarily. Okay, I can see I went a little over the line on this image. So I'm going to go back to that, edit, free transform, and just bring it down just a bit. Okay, now let's drag this line down here. Place it right at the bottom. And we'll resize this next one. First we'll line it up with the top, and we'll resize it. Free transform, hold down the shift key. There we are. And we're to our final image. Final image. Place that. Edit. Free transform. Hold down shift key. There we go. So let's fit screen, just see how we're looking so far. Okay, we can see that this image sticks out the farthest, so let's align this group here first. That's image number 5, layer 4. And we'll just move that in a bit. And move that in a bit. Not too bad. Let's go down to the next row and see if we can do the same thing. There's plenty of room here. Line up this one. So what I think I'll do is I'll line up against this edge. So I'll bring another line over. And it looks like we did a pretty good job there. And now we can take the center image in each group and kind of even it out. So let's start with the top. We use our arrow keys on the keyboard. Actually, that was probably just about perfect to start with. Maybe a little off. Okay, we'll go to the next row. And we'll do the same thing. That looks about even. And we'll go to our last row. And we'll center that up. Now let's take this group, images 4 through 6, which would be layers 3 through 5, and let's lock them together. And we'll do the same thing with 6 through 8. So now if I grab any image in this group, I can use my keys on my keyboard, arrow keys, and move that up. And I can do the same thing with the next group. Okay, let's go to View, Clear Guides. See where we are. I'm going to shrink this down just a bit to get better perspective. Okay, next thing I want to do is do the crop tool. I want to leave some border around here and the bottom. And I'm going to crop that right there. Okay, so now we need to add some white border on the left and the top to balance this out. We're going to come in Image, Canvas Size. Let's make this 2 inches. And 2 inches there. Top, left. We are not given a choice here with the color of the background. And it's actually going to end up being transparent. Okay. Now one thing I see here is that the image of the frog is actually larger than what I thought. I didn't have it positioned correctly. So let's see if we can do something about that. First thing I want to do is get rid of that link. Oh. So we're going to bring the frog in. And then we're going to reposition the next image. Okay. Now we have this transparent area. And we have white for our foreground color. We have a paint bucket, so we can just fill that. Okay, we want to make this transparent area white, so we can do that with a selection tool with a marquee. We're going to come in here. Say I'm going to start with the whole image. And then subtract from selection. Do this. So now the selected area is between those two dotted lines, and we'll just take our paint bucket and white paint and fill that. Okay, now I get rid of my selection. And you can see there's a little transparency showing through here. Okay, I'm going to create a white layer. And I'm going to grab this and move it on down. So it's at the bottom and now everything is white. Okay, this looks, I want to put a title across the top and it looks like I could use a little more space here, so I'm going to increase that canvas. And we'll just increase the height. Let's go 2 inches just to be safe. Till all of it goes on the top. And now I want to do some text. Bring my size down to something more reasonable. Actually, it looks like we could go pretty large. What I'm looking at is this line here right in the middle. And it changes size as I change font size. And it's telling us how high the characters are going to be. So I'm going to call this Public Art in Sedona. Now you notice we're not seeing anything. It's because my type is white. Change that to black. And as you can see, we could even go larger on the text. And in fact, that's not even enough for this image. So we'll say, let's make that, we can type in whatever we want. So I'm going to say 125. Enter. And then we have a pretty large type. Now you'll notice that it's partially under earlier layers, so I'm going to move it down in the stack. Actually, I'm going to move it up in the stack. Should be all the way at the top. Alright, now it's where we want it. We can come in and move it around a bit. And then we can crop again if we want, or just leave it like this. Use our arrow keys to get it exactly where we want. So anyway, this is one way to create a collage. It's fairly simple, straightforward. You can play around with changing these image sizes and maybe get a different appearance. This is a pretty large gap here compared to the other rows. So you might want to make some of these a little smaller and spread them out a little more. But anyway, you see I think you'll see the general principle of how you do this. So it's another use for the image canvas size command. So let's go on to another topic. Histograms are a very important part of digital photography. I think it's worth spending a few minutes to understand histograms a little better. I've opened the histogram panel in Photoshop by going to the window menu and clicking on histogram. And I closed out all the other panels just to give us a little more space to work with. We're looking at a color image right now. The composite image is here at the top where we can see the different combinations of the colors that make up the image. We also here below we have a histogram for red, histogram for green, and a histogram for blue. I think if you look up you can see like the blue is here. You can follow the green here, and you can see the red comes up in here. So you can follow the shapes for each of these. So the composite image is a combination of these three histograms, which are called channel histograms. So they're the red, green, and blue channels that make up colors, and this is the composite. A histogram generically just means a way of displaying the distribution of information. If you measured a bunch of things and you want to show how those particular items are distributed, you draw a histogram. The famous bell curve for grading papers in school is a histogram. It's showing how many students performed at which level. The photographic histogram is made up of 255 bars, and I'm going to come here. If you watch over here, as I move my cursor along here, it'll tell you exactly what bar this is and what the level of data is for that particular bar. So right now I'm at bar 5 on the red channel histogram, and my count is 0. I'm going to move over probably, I can see a line. There it is, it's at level 3. It's the third bar of the 255. And it has a count of 5,355. That means that there are 5,355 pixels of data that have this particular shade of red in this particular image. Likewise, I can go to any of these other bars and it'll give me the count for that particular bar. How much data is there for each of these bars? Okay, what I want to do now is to back up and look at this in a little simpler terms to give a better idea how these histograms are created. So I'm going to go to just a blank page, and you can see there's no data on the histogram, which actually there is data. Everything is up here along the right side. That's actually a line along the right side. You can see it looks different than the left side. The right is pure white, the left is pure black. If we were to fill this with black paint, you'll see that line shift to the other side. I'm going to do that right now. See that? Now we have the line on that side. So all the data is pure black right now. And I'm going to restore this to pure white. And there we are. We have the line on the right side now. So the left side is pure black, right side is pure white. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to shade that in. And what I want to do is come down here on the grayscale, and I've picked a gray value of 88. So the red is 88, the green is 88, the blue is 88. And I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to use my paint bucket to fill it. And when I do, and let's just deselect that. But when I do, you'll see there is a line at, and it'll tell me it's at 88. Mine is at 88. Actually, on the composite, it's showing 88 and 89. Down here in each one of these, you can see all the data is at 88. Okay, a little shift there. In the green, it's at 89. And in the blue, it's at 89. That's why we're seeing the double line up here in the composite. But at any rate, we had filled this with the gray that is 88. And now if we go back and we pick another value, this time 37, and draw an elliptical marquee this time, and fill it with 37. We'll see data at 37 and 88, 89. It's not putting them exactly where we think they should be, but it's in the ballpark. The height of these lines is dependent upon the total surface area. So I'm going to draw something much smaller. And I'm going to fill that with another color. And I'm going to make it a lighter gray this time. And you can see this isn't a perfect shade of gray. Let me try again. Here we have 168 now. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to use my paint bucket to fill that. Select, deselect. And you'll see we have a shorter line at 168. Now the other thing about histograms is they don't really care where the color is in the image. You're just recording how much of the image has that particular shade. What I want to do is I want to add a new layer here. Layer, new. And I'm going to be working on a new layer now, and I'm going to take the rectangular marquee and I'm going to fill it with that same shade of gray that we just had. And for this particular layer, as you can see, it's all at that one spot. And now the composite is showing everything, but I want to show as I move this box of color around, it doesn't matter where it is in the image, the histogram does not change. Okay, now let's take this last one and let's change the color now. Let's get something a little more colorful. And let's put that in here. And you'll see it created some lines in different areas because now it's not just a shade of gray. It has some red, some green, and some blue, which values aren't all the same. We'll go back here. The red's at 167, the green and the blue are at 55. Let's pick another shade. I'll pick that one. So we have 198, 116. Let's make this 100. Just so we have different values. The red, the green, and the blue are going to be on different lines along the histogram. I'm going to say OK, and now I'm going to I need to bring up my layers panel for a moment. And I'm going to switch to the background layer. And now I filled that. And you can see we're starting to develop some distribution of color, and there's some difference in the channels and the heights of the bars. So we're beginning to get what looks like a histogram. And basically, if we kept working at this and using different shades and different colors, we would eventually get a histogram that looks more like this histogram. So I hope that this helps. And again, remember that it really doesn't matter where the color data is in the image. The histogram is totally unaffected by the location. It's only the volume, the quantity of tone and color data. So I hope that gives you a better idea of what histograms are all about. Okay, that wraps up the topics I wanted to cover in Chapter 6. So I'm going to call it quits for now, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks.